I'm confident in saying that when you set up your PS5, you configure these HDR settings completely wrong, and as a result, your PS5's visuals are being severely limited. Don't worry though, as I'm going to show you exactly how you should set this up in order to ensure you're getting the most accurate and best looking picture possible. First things first, if your display supports HGiG, it's absolutely essential that you enable it. For the best results, you should also set this up in as dark a room as possible. With that done, go to your PS5 settings, then screen and video, then down to the HDR options and select Adjust HDR. Now, this is where 99% of PS5 users go wrong, because whilst the instructions do say to adjust it until the sun becomes barely visible, that'll result in the PS5 thinking your display has a much lower peak brightness than it actually does, which will then harm the overall look. So to ensure that isn't the case, you first want to go down to the darkest value possible and then go back up from there whilst counting however many button clicks it takes until the sun completely disappears. For this LG G2 OLED, that took 16 clicks, but this will vary across different TVs and monitors. For those of you using a display that doesn't support HGiG, you'll instead want to find out what its peak 10% brightness window is, and I recommend doing that by finding your display on ratings.com. Then look for a value where they have tested it for HDR gaming specifically. Whilst you're at it, let me know what display you're using in the comments and I'll be sure to give you a heart. I'd love to know. Anyway, using that 10% peak brightness number, round it up to whatever is closest to it from the values on screen, and then use a corresponding number of clicks from the lowest level in order to configure HDR correctly during this first step. You can then click next and do the same thing on step 2, using the exact same number of clicks as you did last time. Moving on to the third configuration page, the instructions are even more misleading. Again, if you do what it suggests and set it to where the icon is barely visible, then your PS5 will think that your TV can only produce blacks above a set brightness. So if you're using an OLED, this is especially important to get right, as otherwise those luscious true blacks will be ruined entirely. For the best results possible, you simply just want to set this to the lowest value, so that's going to be where the darker button prompt becomes grayed out. You can then click confirm. With the main HDR adjustments complete, you can now turn HGiG off and use tone mapping on your TV if you do need a brighter image. However, this may also crush shadows or clip details, so I should stress that if you want your games to look as close to the developer's intent as possible, you should keep HGiG enabled. Also, consider setting your color temperature to a warmest value, as this will better match the D65 white balance target that developers are advised to optimize for. If you do go this route and keep using HGiG as well, it's strongly recommended that you play in a pitch black room, as the overall brightness will be lower to allow for that greater and more accurate dynamic range. Now, back in your PS5 settings, I also recommend that you set the main HDR option to on when supported instead of always on, as otherwise you'll be forcing HDR on for games that are made to be shown just as regular SDR. That goes directly against the developer's intentions and may even result in washed out colours in some titles. To see a further 40 plus default PS5 settings that you need to change, watch a video on screen now, and also please consider liking and subscribing if you found any of this useful. I'm super close to 100k and would really appreciate your help to get there.